Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 35, Proper Introduction of Training Tools.
Let's start with the first one, the empathizing.
Okay, well here, let me extend an olive branch here, because when it comes to empathizing, an approach that I've been able to develop, uh, not lately, like I've been able to do it for a while. I'd like to think, but I've just really had a lot of opportunity to do this lately. Um, when it comes to empathizing, I typically, for the most part, for the vast majority of the time, will start dogs with food work, like regardless of where they are in their age and their temperaments and whatever's going on and stuff. Um, and I noticed very quickly that empathizing is a funny gig because it's kind of a two-pronged approach. You empathize with the dog and you empathize with the owner too. And sometimes the owners are like fed up with this dog. And so I met these clients. They're now private lesson clients of mine, and we've just done our second lesson. And when I first met them for the eval, it's this sweet little poodle puppy, little toy poodle. And she's super yappy and super like controlling, and I'm trying to explain to them why we want to start with food work and go through all this process of having her just enjoy training and all this stuff. And the dad's like cutting me off to let me know, like, God, can we stop the barking? You know? And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, we'll get there. And then he actually brings out this what's it called? It wasn't an e-collar, it was a bark collar,
Mark Collie, yep.
You're right.
Yep.
And it wasn't stim, it was vibration. And he puts it on the dog and it vibrates her and she stops for like a second and then she barks again and just starts barking through it from then on. And I know it's working because I can hear it makes a tone when it's going to go. And she just blows through it anyway. And I'm like, okay, so, and I take it off of the dog. And I don't know if this is like weird. It's funny because I'm a big proponent of e-collars. I'm not the biggest fan of like bark collars and e-fences and stuff like that, because the control that you have to me is a little more safe than just a collar going by itself.
Right. It's more of it's a personal touch.
Yeah, well, and I've seen too many mistakes of a dog bark, correct. So they bark because they got corrected, and it's just this crazy cycle. And some e-collars or bark collars turn up by themselves, and it. Anyway, so I was explaining to him, bark collars, if you're going to use one, your dog absolutely first needs to understand what a correction even is. Because if not, the poor dog is just getting zapped for what they presume to be nothing. It's just getting hit. And if that's the case, I don't blame the dog at all for barking and feeling nervous, especially when someone comes over. It's like, man, this every time someone walks in the door, I get my ass kicked. I can empathize with this dog, but I understand the owner too. So I started immediately working, not so much to defend e-collar, but almost to like defend the dog. And I was like, look, man, wait a minute. I'm a fan of e-collars. I work with e-collars. We can talk about this if that's what we're looking at longer term. But understand this, and this. Understand timing means X, Y, and Z. I'll get you there, but not yet. So do me a favor, take that thing off the dog, and let's work with this first. And that's kind of where we've been. So that was a funny one. And I keep, how it is, like, you can think of like 4 or 5 different things at once. So I'm over here talking with this person and dealing with whatever else is going on in my day. But you pop into my head because you and I have talked about this so much over the past couple of years, and I'm like, yeah, it's funny. Like, I get what you mean now. Like, it's one thing to when you hear someone explain, and then you see it work, and you're like, I always knew, like, I know you're smart and everything, but it's like, oh yeah, that does kind of work. Okay, sure.
Dude, story of my life with my own mentors. It's like I've heard them say the same thing like 5, 6 times. But again, you have to be ready to understand something. You don't always get it right away.
Yeah,
But that's
agreed.
dope. That's dope. I want to bring up this cool episode. Shout out to Natalie Dobkins. She's an amazing dog trainer. I think she is Canine Performance on Instagram. Definitely been following some of her stuff recently. Started listening to her podcast a couple months ago. She has this wonderful episode. I forgive me for not quoting it properly, but I think it was called like empathy versus empathy versus sympathy in dog training.
I remember that.
And it was a damn good episode. And pretty much what she breaks down in that episode of her podcast is she says a lot of times people are spending too much time empathizing with their dogs versus sympathizing with their dogs. And what this means is people are spending too much time feeling with their dogs. So if the dog feels sad, they go, oh my God, there's something that I did that made the dog feel sad. So I'm going to feel sad with them. It's almost like a guilt trip. It's like an empathy guilt trip, right?
Mhm.
And so what ends up happening is people put themselves too much in the dog's shoes, and the dog's not even hasn't even gone through a process, right? Like the dog's going through stress, or doesn't know how to go through stress. Versus what she says is you should actually feel sorry for the dog, not feel sorry with the dog. Okay. And the reason for that is empathy is a wonderful skill to have as a human being, as an animal, as a creature. Honestly, it's what drives a lot of our really beautiful behaviors in the world. However, when it comes to dog training, having too much empathy with your dog will actually prevent you from controlling them, or providing them with structure, or providing them, in essence, we sometimes get a fear of putting our dogs through stress, right? Versus if we have sympathy for our dogs and actually feel sorry for their bad past, we feel sorry for them that they didn't grow up with structure. So now it's our job to do that. We have to feel sorry for them that they don't have control over themselves. If you feel sorry for your dogs versus feeling sorry with your dogs, then we can actually take action, and that action we can convert into proactivity. We can actually start training, we can actually make a difference. And so we thought it was a really cool look on this idea of empathy, versus, as a human, empathy is a great tool, but sometimes with our dogs it can be a little too toxic. So I thought that was a great episode. So again, shout out to Natalie Dopkins.
Yeah, Natalie Dawkins, what's up? And it's a good point because even when it comes to humans, and and I remember that episode was it was like one of the shorter episodes,
Mhm,
like 16, 17, but it was really good. And I remember thinking to myself when I was listening to it, it was kind of like what Brene Brown talked about with people, like human to human. Empathizing
mhm.
is good, but don't overdo it. And her example was like if somebody falls in a hole, you can feel bad for them, you can want to help them out, but if you fall in the hole with them, now you're just two people stuck in a hole. Like
Exactly.
nobody can help anybody because you're both in the same position.
Exactly.
Whereas if you keep a healthy sense of like proportionality and make sure that you don't over identify with this person or this dog, because people do that a ton, right? When it comes to like rescues and things like that, nervous dogs,
Mhm.
they put themselves into this place to where they're incapable of giving the dog what they need, and it comes from a place again of empathy. We understand that, but a lot of work with these kinds of dogs is getting the owners to remind or us remind them anyway, we
Mhm.
get where you're coming from. You don't want this dog to feel any pain. I understand. They maybe had a horrible past upbringing. I get all of that. But what you're not understanding, because you're letting your emotion cloud your understanding, is you are not doing this dog any favors by allowing them to continue these bad behaviors.
Right.
It's not noble of you or good of you or whatever the case, in nicer terms, obviously, but I'm just making a point. It's not like good of you to allow your dog to continue to be an asshole or do dangerous things or whatever the case. You're letting him risk himself. That's not what good parents do. And once you kind
Right.
of put them in that mindset of like, as your mother who cares about you very much, I'm going to do you the favor of helping put you in check, and save your life literally.
Exactly, and relieving you of that stress,
Correct.
relieving you of that perceived responsibility, relieving you of that fear, and let you know that I got this covered or handled. Yeah, for sure. That's a huge one, and I think when we're talking training collars, I think definitely discussing a you know uh, how it's you can look at either side. You can look at the half empty or half full, right?
Mhm.
And what we have to do as dog trainers is we have to show them to talk to them about the positives, right? Because again, they empathize. I wouldn't want something on my neck. So why would I put something on my dog's neck? Well, the difference is obviously two different species, right? Four-legged creatures have stronger necks than two-legged creatures. They play and wrestle on their necks, so they're more durable and stronger. But also, four-legged creatures, they do, again, this is proven, they do apply control on each other's necks, right? And not necessarily control in a correction way, right? I wouldn't say that when bears want to correct each other that they bite each other on the neck. That's not what we're saying. But if there is a fight, a grapple, play fighting, wrestling, there's a lot of neck action going on four-legged creatures, and this is normal, right? So
Mhm.
we don't do that as humans. We don't grab each other by the neck as kids and drag each other around the floor. We don't do that.